"This trip is just for family," Ryan said, his voice so cold it stole the air from my lungs. I stood frozen in the middle of the airport, my hand gripping the suitcase handle, my heart shattering as I watched my own son cross my name off the passenger list. "Monica will be taking your place," he added without even meeting my eyes, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient stranger. Allison, my daughter-in-law, flashed that familiar fake smile and said, "Go home, Kimberly. This trip isn't for you." Her words pierced straight through me, but what hurt most was that no one looked at me. My son, the boy I carried, raised and loved all my life, couldn't even lift his head, while others humiliated his mother in public. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because this story began 3 weeks earlier, when I still believed I was part of that family. The kitchen was filled with the warm smell of waffles and cinnamon as I baked Ryan's favorite orange cake. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the excitement I felt after hearing his voice on the phone. "Mom, we have a surprise for you." That gentle tone, I hadn't heard it in years. "A family trip, all of us together." Those words felt like music to my ears. Ever since Allison came into Ryan's life, I had slowly been pushed aside. Family dinners faded away, holidays became smaller, and I turned into someone they merely tolerated out of obligation. But this time felt different. They invited me. They remembered me. I was part of them again. I spent an entire week shopping for new clothes. I wanted to look presentable, to make Ryan proud of his mother. I bought a coral dress that made me look younger, comfortable yet elegant shoes, and even splurged on that pearl necklace I'd admired for months. Every night I lay awake, too excited to sleep, imagining laughter, family photos, and dinners by the beach. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted them to see they'd been right to include me. On the morning of the trip, I woke before dawn. I put on my new dress and light makeup. In the mirror, I saw a 69-year-old woman aging, yes, but still dignified and tender. I arrived at the airport an hour early, my heart pounding with anticipation. When I spotted Ryan and Allison near the check-in counter, my smile slowly faded. Ryan avoided my gaze, while Allison whispered something to Monica, her close friend. Monica? What was she doing here? This was supposed to be a family trip. I rolled my suitcase toward them, still smiling. "Good morning," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Ryan turned around. The look in his eyes wasn't joy, it was discomfort mixed with pity. "Mom, we need to talk." My heartbeat slowed. He led me to a corner, away from Allison and Monica, both watching me from a distance, smiling in that unreadable way. "Mom, there's been a small change in plans. We thought it'd be better if this trip was just for immediate family." I froze. "But I am family, Ryan. I'm your mother." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair just like his father used to when he was lying. "It's nothing personal, Mom. It's just that Allison thought it would make more sense for Monica to come along. They have things to discuss for work, and well, you don't really fit into our plans." Don't fit. That phrase echoed in my mind. After 45 years of raising, sacrificing, and living for him, I no longer fit in his life. But I've been preparing for weeks. I bought clothes, rescheduled my doctor's appointments. "I know, Mom, but the decision's been made." When we returned to the check-in counter, Monica gave me a sympathetic smile. "Kimberly, I hope you understand. This is best for everyone." Then Allison stepped forward, her polished smile as flawless as ever. "Dear Kimberly, honestly, this trip involves a 10U. A lot of outdoor activities, hiking, walking, quite exhausting. At your age, it could be risky. At your age, those words cut deep. 69, and they spoke as if I were fragile, useless, a burden to be handled with care. Besides, Allison continued, Monica and I have so much to plan for the upcoming event. You'd just get bored. Ryan stood there, silent, nodding like a boy afraid of his wife. The same boy who once held my hand when he was scared now stood by while others degraded me. But you could stay home and take care of the plants for us, Allison added with her kind smile. You know how we love coming back to a clean house. So that was it in their eyes. I wasn't a mother. I was an unpaid housekeeper, a caretaker for their plants, their laundry, their perfect home. Monica handed me my ticket, now printed with her name. Thank you for giving up your seat for me, Kimberly, she said softly. I swallowed hard. Giving up my seat? No, it had been taken from me. Ryan met my eyes, uncertain. Please don't be upset, Mom. I'll do something special for you when we're back. Another empty promise. Then the announcement came, boarding call for my flight, the trip I'd spent weeks dreaming about. Allison, Monica said, it's time to check in. Allison turned to me once more. Kimberly, call a cab home, okay? And don't forget to water the plants on the balcony. I stood frozen, watching them walk away with their luggage. Ryan didn't look back once. Allison looped her arm through Monica's and laughed as they disappeared into the crowd. I just stood there, invisible in a sea of rushing travelers. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. 50 years of marriage and motherhood had taught me to stay composed, to be strong, to be proper. But right then, there was nothing left to hold on to. Ma'am, are you okay? A gentle voice broke through the noise. I looked up, a young airline employee, her eyes full of concern. I'm fine, I lied, wiping my tears quickly. She nodded kindly. Would you like to change your ticket? I looked down at the meaningless piece of paper in my hand, a ticket to a trip that no longer had a place for me. No, I whispered. There's nothing left to change. I pulled my suitcase slowly through the terminal, each step heavier than the last. At the taxi stand, the driver asked, Where to, ma'am? Home, I murmured. Home, the house I'd lived in alone for 5 years since my husband passed. The house where Allison's plants waited to be watered, where their dirty laundry likely piled up, where their fridge waited to be cleaned before they returned. The city buzzed with life as if nothing had happened, but inside that cab, I sat quietly, realizing that my own son had just abandoned me. At your age, you might get hurt, Allison had said, her sweet tone dripping with contempt, as if 69 were an illness to be avoided, as if I were a frail, useless woman instead of the one who had once given her everything. I stood frozen. When did they start looking at me that way? When did I let others decide what I could or couldn't do? I thought of my mother at 70. She still traveled alone across Europe, learned to use computers, lived every day like an adventure. But me? I had become a smaller, frightened version of myself, a woman who needed permission to exist in her own son's life. When I returned home, I opened the door and was met by silence. That silence, my faithful companion for years. I dropped my suitcase by the entryway and walked straight to my bedroom. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked at the woman in the mirror, dazed face, empty eyes. I looked like someone the world had cast aside, like a person whose worth didn't even equal the price of a plane ticket. I picked up my phone to call Nancy, the only friend I still kept in touch with. But I stopped. What would I even say? That my son had crossed my name off a family trip to take his wife's friend instead? That I'd been foolish enough to believe they truly wanted me there? I hung up before she could answer. I walked to the closet. The coral dress I'd bought for the trip still hung there, next to the new shoes. I brushed my fingers over the fabric, remembering the joy I'd felt choosing each item. And then, something inside me broke. Not a scream, not a storm of rage, but a quiet, cutting realization. I finally understood that my whole life I had been trying to earn love from people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I lifted the coral dress, holding it up in front of me. It was beautiful. It made me look bright and alive. I had bought it to impress a family that saw me as a burden. I had spent the last of my savings for a trip that was never meant for me. But this time, instead of pitying myself, I felt something else, a sharp, clean anger. It rose in my chest, spreading through me like fire. No, I wasn't angry at Ryan, though part of me despised him for becoming so weak. Nor was I only angry at Allison, though her cruelty was revolting. I was angry at myself for allowing this to happen, for shrinking so small, for becoming this desperate version of who I used to be. I changed out of the clothes I'd worn to the airport and slipped into the coral dress. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman. No longer the pitiful one left behind, but a mother who had raised her son, a wife who had endured 50 years of marriage, a widow who had survived losing her husband, and I, Kimberly, was worthy of respect. I walked down to the kitchen, still wearing the dress. The house felt strange, almost foreign, as if it had never truly been mine. Allison's plants still sat on the balcony, and her neatly written list was taped to the fridge. Clean the house, buy groceries, prepare dinner before we return. I tore the list into tiny pieces. Each scrap that hit the floor felt like a broken chain, a command I would never obey again. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Mom, we're on the plane. Thanks for understanding. No words of love, just another reminder about those damn plants." I typed and deleted dozens of replies. I wanted to scream that he was a coward, to ask when I'd become his maid. But in the end, I wrote only, "Have a nice trip." Then I turned off the phone. At my desk, I pulled out the old checkbook I hadn't touched in years. I needed to get away from this house filled with their contempt. But when I checked my account, I froze. I barely had enough to cover a month's expenses. For years, Ryan had managed all my finances. He decided what I could spend, what bills to pay. Me, a mother who had once held the family together, now lived off her son's kindness. But then I remembered. In the corner of the closet was an old shoebox I hadn't opened since my husband died. Robert had said he'd take care of all the paperwork. Still, I'd kept a few things for the memories. I rushed upstairs and dug through the box. Inside were old receipts, bank papers, and a sealed envelope marked "To Kimberly" in Robert's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were a letter and a stack of documents. "My dearest Kimberly, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There's something I never told you, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want you to worry. The airline company I inherited from my father, I never sold it. It's now under your name. All the documents are in the bank safe. The code is your birth date. You're far wealthier than you think. Use this money to live happily, not to please anyone. I love you, always." I sat there in shock. An airline company? A bank safe? Wealth? Robert had been just an accountant, a simple man. How could this be? I flipped through the papers, and there it was, clear as day. My name listed as the sole owner of Sunlight Airlines. The date of transfer 6 months before Robert's death. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. All those years I'd struggled on a widow's budget, treated like a burden by my own son, and all along, I'd been the owner of an entire airline. I immediately called the bank. After verifying my identity, they confirmed, yes, there was indeed a safety deposit box under my name. An hour later, still wearing the coral dress, I stood before the safe that held the secret that would change my life. Inside were financial statements filled with staggering numbers and another letter from Robert. I asked the CEO, Mr. George Matthews, to manage everything until you were ready. I trust you'll know what to do when the time comes. I used the office phone to dial the number listed on the documents. Mrs. Kimberly, my God, I've been waiting for this call for 5 years, the man exclaimed. Your husband told me to keep running the airline until you were ready to take over. For what purpose? I asked, still barely believing it. To run your company, ma'am. Kimberly, you're the owner of one of the largest airlines in the country. Would you like to meet to go over the details? 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sleek downtown office, listening to him tell me that I was a millionaire, that hundreds of people worked for my company, that planes bearing the Sunlight Airlines logo flew across continents. My son, he doesn't know any of this? I asked. No, ma'am. Mr. Robert instructed complete confidentiality until you chose to reveal it. I pressed my lips together, picturing Ryan currently flying to Hawaii, probably texting me about watering his plants, perhaps even sitting on one of my planes. George, I said, smiling for the first time in years, I'd like to confirm a flight. Of course, ma'am. Which one? Flight 347 to Hawaii this morning, he typed for a moment. Yes. 3 passengers under the name Parker, Ryan Parker, Allison Parker, and Monica Evans. Added at the last minute, replacing Kimberly Parker. A quiet laugh escaped me. Kimberly Parker, the name they'd crossed off the list. I stood, straightened my coral dress, and said, George, could you contact the captain of that flight for me? Certainly, ma'am. What message should I relay? Tell him to announce to the passengers that Kimberly Parker, owner of Sunlight Airlines, is aboard their flight. George blinked, startled. But ma'am, you're here. Exactly, I replied with a cold smile. Let them think I'm there. It's time they learn who really controls that flight. George immediately understood and gave a mischievous grin. It will be my pleasure, ma'am. While he called the captain, I imagined Ryan and Allison's faces when they heard my name over the airplane speakers, the woman they had just publicly humiliated at the airport, the mother who didn't fit into their plans, the woman who might get hurt if she traveled. Turns out, that woman was the owner of the airline they were flying on. All set, ma'am, George said. Captain David Wallace is honored to make the announcement. He said it's a privilege knowing the chairwoman herself is personally monitoring the flight's service quality. Good, I answered. Now, George, tell me everything about this company. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of revelations. Robert, my late husband, had inherited a small airline from his father and turned it into an empire. We had contracts with luxury hotels, charter flights for celebrities, and an annual revenue higher than anything I'd ever fleeced. I spent in my entire life. Your husband reinvested every cent of profit, George explained. He lived modestly so no one would suspect a thing, but in reality, Mrs. Kimberly, you're one of the wealthiest women in the country. As he spoke, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Ryan was calling. I ignored it. Then Allison. Ignored again. Finally, Monica, Allison's friend. I frowned. Why was she calling me? I picked up. Mrs. Kimberly? Her voice trembled. Is it true you own this airline? "Hello, Monica," I said, my tone calm and controlled. "How's the flight? The one I was supposed to be on?" I don't even know what to say. Ryan's in shock, and Allison, she's pale as a ghost. When the captain announced that you were the owner, she could barely breathe. "I can imagine," I said softly. "It's not easy realizing the woman you just insulted is the one signing the checks. Mrs. Kimberly, this must be some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Monica." I heard Allison clearly when she told me to go home because this trip isn't for me. I heard Ryan say, "I didn't fit into their plans." And I heard you thank me for giving up my seat so you could go instead. Silence. I could picture the scene on the plane, Ryan finally realizing he'd betrayed the only person who ever truly loved him. Allison realizing she had completely underestimated the woman she called a burden, and Monica, frozen in shame, knowing she'd been part of their cruelty. "Do you want to talk to Ryan?" Monica asked, her voice shaky. "No," I said firmly. "Right now, I'm busy getting to know my own company. But tell my son that when he comes back, he and I will have a very serious conversation." I hung up. Across from me, George looked at me with admiration. "Ma'am, if I may," he said, "I think your husband would be very proud. He always said you were stronger than you realized." It seems he was right. "George," I asked, "how could Ryan not know anything about this company? He never once wondered where the money for college, the wedding, or that apartment came from?" "Your husband was meticulous," George replied. "He ran a small accounting firm that justified a middle-class lifestyle. Larger expenses were disguised as bonuses or loans. Ryan never suspected a thing." Of course he didn't. Ryan had never questioned anything. He accepted every gift: the expensive tuition, the lavish wedding, the luxury apartment as if it were his birthright, never asking how an ordinary accountant could possibly afford it all. "So what do you want to do now, Mrs. Kimberly?" For the first time in 5 years, I felt I had choices. I no longer depended on my son's pity. I no longer had to beg for attention. I was no longer a maid in my own life. "I want to know everything about this company," I said, rising to my feet, feeling warmth rush through my veins. "Every plane, every route, every employee." I paused, then smiled a real smile I hadn't felt in years. "And after that, I want to plan the trip of my life." The phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Mom." Ryan's voice was frantic. "We need to talk." "Oh, now you want to talk?" I replied, my tone icy. "I don't understand what's happening. The captain said you own the airline. That can't be true. Dad was just an accountant. We never had that kind of money." I listened to his voice, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the instinct to comfort him, to make him feel better, to minimize my own pain for his sake. All I felt was a strange, cold calm. "Your father was many things you never truly knew, Ryan. And apparently, so am I." "But Mom, if that's true, why didn't you tell us? Why did you live like you had nothing?" The question struck me deeply. Why didn't I know? Why? Had I spent 5 years living like a poor widow, dependent on my own son's pity when I could have lived freely, independently? "Because your father wanted to protect you," I finally said. "He wanted you to learn humility and the value of hard work before knowing what the family truly had. But he died before he could tell you, and you chose to keep living in ignorance. Are you blaming me now?" Ryan snapped. That accusatory tone made my blood boil. Even now, after everything, he still found a way to make me feel guilty. "I only found out this morning, Ryan," I said, my voice rising. "After you left me, standing at the airport like a piece of old luggage. There was silence. I heard Allison's voice faintly in the background, asking what was going on. "Mom, Allison wants to talk to you." "I don't care what she has to say. She said enough this morning." "Please, Mom." "She's really sorry. We both are." "Sorry for what, Ryan? For humiliating me in public? Or for finding out that the woman you look down on happens to be a millionaire?" The long silence on the other end was all the answer I needed. "Mom, you know we love you. It was just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding." I cut him off. "For years, I've been treated like an outsider in my own family. I've begged for scraps of attention, waited for an invitation to my own son's table, lived off the crumbs of affection you decided to give me." George quietly watched from across the room. I gestured that I didn't need privacy. I wanted a witness to this moment. "Mom, please, when we get back, we can fix this." "Fix it how, Ryan? By pretending nothing happened? By pretending you never told me I didn't fit into your plans? By pretending Allison never said, 'Go home, this trip isn't for you'?" That was Allison's fault. She was just stressed. Always an excuse. Always a reason. I gave a short laugh. "You're right about one thing, Ryan. I don't fit into your plans. But now, I don't need to fit into anyone else's." "What do you mean?" "I mean that starting today, I'm following my own plans. I'm going to run this company. I'm going to visit every place I've ever dreamed of. I'm going to live the life I deserve, not the one you allow me to have." Allison's voice came through the line this time. It no longer carried the arrogance it had that morning. "Mrs. Kimberly, I'm so sorry for what happened. I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to?" I repeated slowly. "Allison, you looked me in the eye and told me this trip wasn't for me. You ordered me around like a maid, told me to water your plants, clean your house, make sure everything was spotless. Do you really think those things don't hurt? I thought you'd understand. This trip was important for me and Monica. We had things to discuss. And what am I in your mind, Allison? A useless old burden? No, of course not. You're Ryan's mother." "Exactly. I'm Ryan's mother. Not your maid, not your babysitter, not your gardener. The mother of the man you claim to love, and you treated me like I was nothing." I heard her start to cry. A part of me, the part trained for decades to forgive, to comfort, wanted to say, "It's all right." But that part of me had died earlier that morning, right there in the airport. "You made my son see his own mother as a burden, Allison. And worse, Ryan let you do it. Mom, I'm sorry. When we get back, I'll change." "I promise." "No more promises, Ryan," I said firmly. "I don't need to wait for you to decide when I'm allowed to exist in your life. I no longer have to beg for scraps of affection." "What do you mean?" "I mean that after 5 years, for the first time, I feel free. Free from expectations, free from disappointment, free from having tellers. To beg for love from people who never truly wanted to give it." George handed me a note. "The flight will land in 3 hours. Any instructions, ma'am?" I smiled as I read it. Ryan was still talking, still pleading, still making promises I knew he'd never keep. "Ryan," I interrupted, "enjoy the rest of your trip. When you come home, the house will be exactly the same. The plants will still be green, but I won't be there." I hung up, and for the first time in years, I felt a silence that wasn't frightening. It was peaceful, full of possibility. I turned to George. "I need your help with something. When that plane lands, I want them to have a little surprise waiting." "How would you like them to be welcomed, ma'am?" George asked. "I want them to know exactly who I am," I said, calm but resolute. Not the pitiful woman they humiliated this morning, but the owner of the company that gave them the trip of their dreams. George chuckled softly. You're thinking of a special reception, aren't you? Exactly. I nodded. I want them to understand exactly what they've done the moment they step off that plane. We spent more than an hour planning every detail. George contacted the airport manager in Cancun, arranged a VIP reception, and ensured that Ryan, Allison, and Monica would be reminded in no uncertain terms who was behind every luxurious moment of their vacation. Meanwhile, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I called my only true friend, Laura. We'd known each other since college, and she'd always been the one to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. Kimberly, I thought you were flying to Hawaii with Ryan, Laura exclaimed. No, I said softly. Can you come see me? I have something to tell you. Of course. Are you all right? You sound different. I'm better than ever, I smiled. For the first time in years, I'm really awake. An hour later, Laura was sitting in my living room, her eyes widening as I told her everything: the humiliation at the airport, the discovery of the airline, the tense phone call with Ryan and Allison. Oh my God, Kimberly, she breathed when I finished. I always knew Allison was fake, but this is cruel, even for her. Why didn't you ever say something? I used to defend her, I sighed. I kept telling myself she just needed time to adjust. That as long as Ryan was happy, that was enough. I spent years convincing myself I was too sensitive, too demanding. Laura's voice softened. And Ryan, the boy who once promised to take care of you, turned into a man who lets his wife treat his mother like hired help. I nodded. The words hurt because they were true. The sweet boy I raised had become a stranger I could barely recognize. But things are different now, I said quietly. I have choices I never knew I had. I have power I'd forgotten was mine. Laura tilted her head. And what will you do with it? I stayed silent for a moment. Part of me wanted revenge, to make Ryan and Allison pay for every ounce of humiliation, but another part, deeper and calmer, wanted something else. I want to live, I said. Truly live, not as a shadow of who I used to be. Laura smiled. That's the Kimberly. I remember the woman who stood up to professors when they were wrong, who organized student protests, who defended girls who couldn't defend themselves. You were always that woman. I laughed softly. She was right. 45 years of marriage and motherhood had buried that version of me beneath layers of compliance and self-sacrifice. The saddest part, I said, is that I tried so hard to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, that I forgot how to just be me. It's never too late to remember who you are, Laura said gently. The phone rang. It was George. Mrs. Kimberly, his voice, came through the speaker. I have news from Cancun. The flight landed, and they've just been informed of who you really are. How did they react? I asked. According to the airport manager, Ryan looked completely devastated. Allison hasn't stopped crying, and Monica can't even lift her head from embarrassment. They received the letter you dictated and the special itinerary for the rest of their stay. Letter? Laura asked curiously. I smiled. In the letter, I told them that every luxury they're enjoying, the 5-star hotel, the private tours, the gourmet dinners, are all courtesy of the woman they humiliated this morning. They can enjoy the trip they stole from me, but when they come home, the world won't be the same, George added. Each activity includes a small plaque reading, with compliments from Kimberly Reynolds, owner of Skywings Airlines. The hotel manager will make sure they're reminded of it every single day. I couldn't help but laugh. It's not exactly revenge, but it's justice. What would you like me to arrange next? George asked. I want you to book me a trip, I said. The most beautiful, the farthest, the most expensive one you can find. I want to see the world on my own terms. When would you like to depart, ma'am? I looked at Laura, who was grinning at me, then glanced around the house filled with old memories, photos, mementos, things that had kept me trapped in the past. Tomorrow, I said decisively. Laura clapped her hands. Can I come with you? Of course. You think I'd let my best friend miss out on this? I've been waiting 5 years for that invitation. She laughed. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like my life was truly beginning again. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of excitement I hadn't felt in years, not the anxious kind that came from wondering if Ryan would call or if Allison was. Upset, but a real deep excitement about a free future. Laura arrived early, carrying 2 suitcases and a bright smile. Ready to conquer the world? More than ever, I replied, and for the first time in years, I meant every word. George had worked through the night. Your first destination, Paris, he announced. Then Venice, followed by Tokyo, and finishing with a week at a private resort in the Maldives. You'll have your own driver, a personal guide, and the presidential suite everywhere you stay, he added. Everything's been arranged. As I zipped my suitcase, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, Ryan calling, Allison texting, even Monica sending an apologetic email. I didn't answer. Laura asked, You're not going to pick up? Maybe, but not now, I said softly. I need to remember who I am without them. A limousine from my airline came to pick us up at noon. The driver, an older gentleman named David, smiled warmly. Mrs. Kimberly, your husband once told me you were the strongest woman he'd ever known. He just worried you might forget it. His words made my eyes sting. Robert, quiet, steady Robert, had understood me better than anyone. At the airport, everything was different from the day before. No condescending looks, no feeling of being left behind. Staff lined up to greet us. Passengers nodded respectfully. The captain, the same one who had announced my name over the intercom the day before, walked up with a genuine smile. Mrs. Reynolds, it's an honor to have you aboard your own flight. My flight, I echoed with a smile as I settled into my first-class seat. My life. During the flight to Paris, Laura and I talked endlessly. She told me about her divorce, about learning to live on her own, about traveling solo, and discovering who she really was. The most freeing thing, she said, lifting her glass of champagne, is realizing you don't need anyone's approval to be happy. I smiled. You're right. I spent my whole life chasing approval from my husband, my son, my daughter-in-law. I forgot happiness was something I could give myself. My phone buzzed again, a text from Allison. Mrs. Kimberly, please hear us out. It was all a misunderstanding. Ryan feels terrible. I handed the phone to Laura. She read it, then laughed. Yesterday you were a troublesome old lady. Today you're a victim of a misunderstanding. Classic. I typed a short reply. Enjoy your vacation. We'll talk when I get back. But deep down, I knew if I ever came back, the woman who returned wouldn't be the same fragile soul left behind at that airport. When the plane landed in Paris, the city was bathed in golden sunset. Before me was a new beginning, not just Paris, but a symbol of everything I had longed for yet never allowed myself to have. The presidential suite overlooked the Eiffel Tower and was larger than my entire old house. Fresh flowers filled the room, and the staff treated us like royalty. Laura turned to me, smiling. See, Kimberly, this isn't a dream. This is the reward you always deserved. That night, we dined at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Every dish looked like a work of art, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly alive. We didn't talk about Ryan or Allison, nor did we dwell on the past. We talked about the future, places to visit, things to experience. Do you know what the best part of all this is? I asked while savoring a dessert more beautiful than any painting. Laura tilted her head. What? For the first time in my life, I'm doing something entirely for myself, not to please anyone, not to meet anyone's expectations, not to earn anyone's love, just because I want to. Laura raised her glass, smiling brightly. To the new Kimberly, the woman who was always there, just waiting to be found again. We toasted under the Paris lights. Two women nearing 70, finally understanding that life doesn't end when others decide your value has run out. Sometimes, life truly begins at that exact moment. 3 weeks later, I returned home completely changed. Not just because of the places I'd seen or the incredible experiences I'd had, but because of something far deeper. I remembered who I was before I became a reflection of everyone else's needs. Paris helped me rediscover my love for art. Venice reminded me that beauty exists to be lived, not merely observed. Japan taught me dignity through self-respect, and the Maldives gave me the greatest gift of all, inner peace, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. But the real transformation came from those long nights talking with Laura, those quiet mornings watching the sunrise in places I once thought I'd never see, and from the painful realization that I had lived decades inside a life that wasn't mine. Ryan was waiting for me when I walked through the door. He looked thinner, older, as if the past few weeks had aged him years. Allison wasn't there, which didn't surprise me. "Mom," Ryan said softly as I set down my suitcase. "We need to talk." "Yes," I said, "but this time I'll go first." I sat down in my favorite chair, the house now truly mine. Ryan sat across from me, fidgeting like a boy about to be scolded. "For 45 years," I began, "I tried to be the kind of mother I thought was right. I gave you everything. I gave up my dreams so you could chase yours. I dimmed my light so you could shine. When your father died, I kept doing it because I thought that's what a good mother was supposed to do." Ryan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "I'm not finished. When Allison came into your life, I let her push me aside because I believed a good mother-in-law should know her place. I accepted crumbs of affection, thinking a little was better than none. I became a spectator in my own son's life because I thought that was love. Mom, I never—" "But you did, Ryan," I interrupted. "Every time Allison insulted me and you said nothing, you made a choice. Every time I was treated like hired help and you stayed silent, you chose the kind of man you wanted to be. And that morning at the airport, when you said I didn't fit into your plans, you showed me exactly where I stood in your life." Tears streamed down his face, but I felt calm. I wasn't speaking from anger, I was speaking from clarity. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really am. Allison's sorry, too. She wanted to come apologize, but I thought it was better if I spoke to you first." I smiled faintly. Sorry for humiliating a woman, or sorry for finding out she's a millionaire. Ryan fell silent, and that silence was all the answer I needed. "Ryan, you'll always be my son, and I'll always love you. But I won't live another day being treated like someone beneath you." "What do you mean?" "I mean everything is going to change," I said clearly. "I'm moving out." "Moving out? Where are you going?" "I bought an apartment downtown, near the airline headquarters. I'm going to take an active role in running the company your father built. It's time I understand it and lead it myself." Ryan's eyes widened. "But this is your home, Mom. I grew up here. All our memories are in this house. "Those memories belong to the woman I used to be," I replied. "That woman is gone. The new Kimberly needs a fresh start." I told him about my plans to create a foundation for older women who had lost themselves in the expectations of others, to keep traveling, and to live each day as a gift instead of an obligation. Ryan lowered his head. "What about me, Mom? What about us?" "That's up to you," I said calmly. "If you want to keep this relationship, it has to be built on respect. I won't tolerate any more condescension, and I'll never beg for affection again. But Allison really wants to change." "No, Allison wants to keep access to the money she just discovered. Those are two very different things." We talked for hours. Ryan cried, apologized, and made promises. Part of me wanted to believe him, but I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone hurt you again. "When you leave," I said, "remember this: I love you. But for the first time in my life, I love myself more, and that will never change." After Ryan left, I stepped onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The flower pots Allison once made me care for were still green and thriving. I smiled not out of duty, but out of joy at seeing them alive. The phone rang. It was George, calling with news about a new project. As we discussed expanding the airline, I realized that, for the first time in decades, I was actually excited about tomorrow. 6 months later, my new life had settled beautifully. My apartment was peaceful and elegant. Work at the airline gave me purpose and joy. My foundation had already helped more than 50 women rediscover their self-worth. Ryan visited regularly alone. Allison had tried to come once, but I made it clear: respect can't be bought with words. It must be proven. One evening, Ryan asked, "Mom, are you happy?" "Free," I replied. "And freedom, when you find it after a lifetime without it, is happiness." That night, I wrote in my journal, "At 69, I've learned that it's never too late to choose your own life. True love begins with yourself, and sometimes the greatest adventure starts right after you think everything is over." The woman who was humiliated at the airport no longer existed. In her place stood a Kimberly who knew her worth, living a dream she once feared to imagine. 2 years later, I stood on the deck of my private yacht, gliding across the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean. Laura sat beside me reading, while Captain David, my loyal employee, steered us toward the next Greek island. The sunlight sparkled on the sea, and I thought, this feels unreal. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Monica, the woman who had taken my place on that flight years ago. "Kimberly, I just wanted to thank you. Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive husband. Now I have my own business and feel alive again after 15 years. Thank you for showing me that change is never too late." I smiled. Over the past 2 years, I'd received hundreds of messages like that from women all over the world, saying my story had helped them regain their confidence and courage. My relationship with Ryan was now balanced. We met every 2 weeks, in places I chose, at times I wanted. He had started therapy to understand why he'd once allowed his marriage to destroy his bond with his mother. Allison had finally recognized the cruelty in her behavior. We weren't close, but at least she had learned respect. She now called me by my name instead of barking orders. Laura noticed my quiet smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking," I said softly, "that the worst day of my life turned out to be the beginning of my real one." Laura laughed. "What I admire most is that you didn't change to get revenge on Ryan and Allison. You changed for yourself. That's the difference between rebirth and revenge with a price tag." She was right. In those early months after the airport incident, I had wanted to use my wealth to make them pay. But I learned that revenge keeps you chained to pain, freedom lets you move forward. That afternoon, as we dined at a seaside restaurant overlooking Santorini, an elderly woman approached our table. She wore a simple dress, and her tired eyes carried a familiar look, the look of someone who had lived too long, feeling invisible. "Are you Kimberly Reynolds?" she asked softly. "I read about you in a magazine. I'm 75, and my family treats me exactly like in your story." I took her hand and smiled. Life doesn't have an expiration date, only moments of awakening. And yours can start today, if you want it to. Her eyes welled up, but not with despair, with hope. She told me her story. A widow, financially dependent on her son, treated like a free babysitter, excluded from every decision. "My son says I should be grateful he lets me live in his house," she whispered. "But that house used to be mine before I gave it to him." I handed her my business card, along with the number of my foundation director, Elena Vargas. "Call her tomorrow," I said, "because it's never too late to reclaim your life. We have special programs for women in your exact situation. You're not alone, and it's definitely not too late." The woman walked away, smiling a smile she probably hadn't worn in years, and I, Kimberly, once again felt grateful for turning pain into purpose. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I've discovered that true legacy isn't the money you leave behind or the companies you build. It's the number of people you inspire to value themselves. It's helping other women see that their stories don't end just because someone else decided they're no longer important. It's proving that dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you claim for yourself." The next morning, as the yacht glided over calm waters toward Mykonos, I received a call from George, the airline's CEO. "Mrs. Kimberly," he said excitedly, "I have wonderful news. An international TV network wants to make a documentary about your story and your foundation. A major publisher wants to release a book about your journey, and 3 prestigious universities have invited you to speak about reinventing life after 60. All of this for what purpose?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "To show the world that rebirth has no age limit, that dignity isn't negotiable, and that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings." I looked out at the endless horizon, the sunset spreading gold across the sea, a world full of possibilities I was just beginning to explore. I thought of the Kimberly from 2 years ago, the woman standing alone at the airport, heartbroken, convinced her life was over. If I could speak to that woman now, I would tell her, "The pain you felt that day wasn't the end of your story, it was the prologue to the best chapter of your life." "I agree to everything," I told George, "but on one condition." "What condition, ma'am?" "I want the message to be crystal clear. It doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've lived for others, or how many times you've felt invisible or insignificant, it's never too late to choose to live for yourself." My friend Laura, sitting nearby, clapped her hands. "That's going to be a speech people will remember for a lifetime." That afternoon, as the yacht gently rocked in the bay, I unexpectedly received a call from Ryan. His voice sounded different, deeper, calmer, as if he'd finally grown up. "Mom," Ryan said, "I wanted to tell you something. Allison and I started seeing a marriage counselor. We're learning to change our behavior, especially in how we treat the people we love." "That's good," I replied. "I'm really glad to hear that." There was a short silence. Then Ryan asked softly, "Do you think someday you'll be able to forgive me completely?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on living my new life that I hadn't really thought much about forgiveness anymore. "Ryan," I said after a pause, I've already forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it certainly doesn't. I mean allowing the same thing to happen again. It simply means I choose not to carry resentment because that weight is too heavy for the new life I'm building. And what about our relationship, Mom? The relationship between you and me, I said gently, has never been better. Because for the first time, it's built on respect, not on my desperation for your approval. When the call ended, I realized that conversation was the perfect closing chapter of my old life. I was no longer the mother begging for attention, but a whole woman, one who chose to have a healthy relationship with her grown son. That evening, as the sun sank into the Mediterranean and the sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, I thought about all the women out there, the ones who feel invisible, who believe their best years are behind them, who think they don't deserve more than what they have. But I, Kimberly Reynolds, at 69, had learned this truth. Sometimes the cruelest rejection is the greatest gift because it leads you back to your own life. And for the first time, I was living that life entirely on my own terms. Sometimes, what we see as loss is actually the biggest gift life can offer. Kimberly's story isn't just about betrayal or unexpected wealth. It's about a woman rediscovering herself after years of living for others. When she finally let go of her need for approval, she found true freedom. Because love and kindness should never mean endless sacrifice, they must come with respect and self-worth. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace for yourself. And sometimes, to save your family bond, you have to start by loving yourself first. And what about you? If you were in Kimberly's place, would you have the courage to stand up and rewrite your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs. And don't forget to follow the channel so we can keep listening, keep learning to love, and keep growing together through the stories yet to come.